let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
We haven't.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes
actually
in
a big
importance of
piece
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed.
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am Andrew Sullivan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Johnny Rickard. How are you, sir?
I'm hanging in there, man. Trying to stay up.
Yeah, I see you're in the garage today. Like it's just it's one of those days.
It is. Yeah, I've got some stuff going on inside, and it was just too much to try and coordinate with everything. So I had to exfil.
I know how that is. My two youngest go back to school tomorrow, so there's general chaos around my house as they are both preparing and lamenting.
Oh yeah.
Return to school.
Oh, I bet it's quite hasty.
Yeah, they've had the last month off. We do year round here in the Raleigh area, so they everybody, the entire school has like the last week off. It's also the break between grades, so they're my middle is starting middle school, and my youngest is going into third grade, and yeah, it's exciting times.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, and then my oldest, who's in high school, he still has like another 7 weeks off. So,
naturally,
yeah,
he's like, suckers.
Yeah, he's loving life, and he will right up until I pointed out last night that well, about the time you go back to school is when your sisters go on their first track out. So he'll be in school and they're out of school for 3 weeks. So yeah, never a dull moment, right? Kids.
Oh wow,
Kids.
Yeah, that's a pretty awesome schedule.
It's interesting. I'll give it that. But yeah, so lots going on. I know this is a short holiday week here in the U.S. Lots of folks had Monday off, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't been a busy week. Chat inside of Red Hat has been active. Email threads have been active. There's been just lots of stuff going on. And of course, the rest of the world certainly doesn't stop just because the U.S. had a holiday. Although I was talking with one of my friends and coworkers across the pond who was saying that it was very, very pleasantly quiet on Monday. So, yeah. I bet. I get that. So today's topic, if anybody is familiar, right, you probably recognize that we don't have a topic actually listed in the title of today's stream. And that's largely because we didn't know what we were going to talk about until basically Friday afternoon, which is after Stephanie was on PTO, and she's the one who manages those things. So today's topic, or topics, I should say, is a bit of a smorgasbord, right? If you saw my social media, I've been using that word. So Johnny has been working on doing some integration between Red Hat SSO, so the Keycloak operator inside of OpenShift, and using GitHub for authentication. So I think that will be particularly interesting. GitHub is just an easy, good example of how you can integrate with that. It's certainly not the only one that's available. Google and lots of other things also work inside of there. And then I guess before we get to that, and top of mind, there's a number of things that I wanted to talk about. So just stuff that's been coming up, it seems more and more frequently lately. And I wanted to touch on it, even though a couple of them are things that we've already talked about previously. But I wanted to bring it up again, see if anybody out there in the world has anything to say about it. So Johnny and I, we can have a conversation between ourselves all day long, right? But anyways... and unfortunately, so Stephanie is not with us today. As I said before, she's on PTO. So Stephanie, we miss you. We're looking forward to you being back. I'll try not to break anything here in the console like I did last time. And with that being said, that's all I got. You got anything, Johnny?
No, the holiday was awesome for us. We blew a bunch of stuff up. So other than that, like it was just... It was quiet in the sense of work, but like it was really loud from the fire.
I feel like there's something Texas in there,
Oh yeah, naturally.
So yeah, our neighbors also had fireworks, and our dog was not a fan. So she came and snuggled with me on the couch and was not a happy camper.
Yeah, my dog trembles. So I got like one of the little sleeves that you put over its head.
Oh yeah, the thunder shirt.
Oh, it's so well. So we have a thunder shirt and the thing like it's actually like it goes over his ears.
Oh yeah,
it's the funniest thing ever. Oh my god, it's hilarious. But he hates it. But it keeps him calm. So
oh, that's good. All right. Well, so this is the Ask an OpenShift Admin office hours live stream, which means that we are here for you, for our audience. So whatever it is that's on your mind, any questions that you have, any problems that you're encountering, feel free to ask us here in chat. So whatever platform you're watching us on, YouTube, Twitch, etc., we get all of the chat aggregated here into our client. Hopefully you will also see it as well. And we're happy to do our best to answer your questions. So don't hesitate to ask whatever it is that's on your mind. If we can't answer your question here on the stream, then we'll usually we have the ability to reach out to product management and engineering and all kinds of other folks inside of Red Hat. We try to do that here on the stream. So usually you'll see one of us will be talking and tap dancing, and the other one will be asking to try and get answers. But if we can't do that, if for whatever reason we can't get a good answer, then during the stream we'll follow up afterwards. You can reach out to us on social media. You can reach out to us via email. All of those other things. Let me find my different overlays here. So you can reach me at Practical Andrew, excuse me, across all the various social medias. So Twitter and Reddit and all of those other things. I'm also on LinkedIn, although just use my regular name there. And you can reach out to me via email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. We love to get your emails. We get emails from people all the time. So don't be shy. Although I will admit that sometimes I fall behind on emails, so please don't be offended if it takes a couple of days to respond. And of course, you can also reach out to Johnny as well. So Johnny is at JRockTX1 on all the various social platforms. I guess except the Kubernetes Slack. We were talking about that a moment ago. It's just JRock on there, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm just couldn't be consistent naturally,
Or and Johnny's also on email, johnny@redhat.com. No H, two N's, J-O-N-N-Y. So yeah, we're accessible all kinds of ways. I've been enjoying the Kubernetes Slack lately. So if you look on kubernetes.slack.com, there is an OpenShift users or OpenShift users channel, I guess they're called. Room, whatever. Yep. Different terminology, right? So that's where most of us hang out at. There's a ton of folks in there who are always asking questions, always willing to help. So it's a great place to find a community, and we of course welcome that. All right, let me do away with that. Let me switch over to my notes document here, and let's talk about some top of mind topics. So the first thing I wanted to talk about here is it's kind of three things all in one, or three separate things that are all going to relate to each other. So I want to, where'd my thing go? I want to share my screen here. And we're going to switch to that layout. And if we look over here, so there's a couple of things that we, that you as administrators probably want to know. So first, if you're running 4.8, 4.9, and you have noticed that there are no upgrade paths into 4.9.38, the reason for that is because of a risk that was identified when using OVN Kubernetes. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to paste it over here into Twitch. And there we go. So I see that my chat here is not...
It updated in Twitch.
Did it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking in the Restream Studio here, and chat isn't working inside of, at least from my console. So I'll have to keep an eye on chat over actually on Twitch and on YouTube, because it just looks like y'all are super quiet out there, and that's unusual.
Yeah, we got a couple questions, but I figured we'd wait until after the top of mind.
Okay, thank you. Please keep me honest, because like I said, I see no chat here in the console window, so I got you. Yeah. Anyways, so I just posted into Twitch the link to this KCS. So essentially, if you're using OVN Kubernetes, there is some risk during an update. So they have chosen to block that upgrade path. That being said, as you scroll down through here, you can look and you can get a bunch of different, it walks you through how to determine which SDN you're using. So if you're using OVN Kubernetes, you're affected. If you're not, so let's say you're using OpenShift SDN, then it is safe to proceed with the upgrade. And if you look down here, it tells you exactly how to do that. So this OC ADM upgrade, allow explicit upgrade -- to - image in that particular pull spec. So this is part of the, what do we call them? Conditional updates set of capabilities, right? So essentially, if you're not affected, there's no reason you can't upgrade. It's a fully supported upgrade. It is in the fast or stable channel. I don't remember which. So it is a fully supported upgrade. It's just disabled by default so that you, the administrator, can make that choice for your cluster. So just follow the process here. You should be fine in doing that, right? This using allow explicit upgrade is the one that actually allows you to do that, right? It kind of forces that. And the reason why I said that it was kind of tied together is because that process, that action, has actually been integrated into the GUI in OpenShift 4.10.16 and later. So let's see here. So this is I've got a 4.10.16 cluster here. I've also got a 4.10.18, I think. I don't know why this one refreshed on me. Yeah, there we go, 4.10.18. So let's look at our 4.10.16. And if I come down here to cluster settings, you'll see that here in my updates, I can select a version. It automatically selects 4.10.20 here because that's the current latest of the stable releases. But if I click the down thing here, you'll notice that I can include the supported but not recommended versions. Right. So if I tick this, well, it must have updated here while we were, because this was working a minute ago. Anyways, if we tick this, it would normally tell us. Let's see if it works on this one. Select a version. Yeah, see, it won't let me click it. What happens if I change to a different channel? Oops. Go with fast. Yeah, so it's not letting me tick it because apparently they're all in the recommended phase right now. But literally an hour ago when I was just checking this, basically 4.17 and 18 were blocked. They weren't blocked, but they weren't available for my particular release. So you can turn on this toggle and it'll tell you precisely why it doesn't suggest that particular release. So in that instance, if we scroll over here to this tab, right, evaluating OpenShift updates to 4.10.14 through 4.10.19. So essentially they discovered an issue which was related to, I think, a hyphen. Yeah, there's like a hyphen or something like that that is misplaced, and it was causing issues for clusters that were updating from earlier releases into this particular version. So you can see, depending on the cluster architecture, clusters which have passed through any of the following releases are vulnerable while leaving that particular release. So you can see if it's an older cluster that you've updated through various architectures or various versions, it has the potential for being affected. So it was one of those, like, yes, it was quote unquote blocked, but you can go into the GUI, you can click the little toggle, and it'll tell you, or it'll allow you to do that update from inside of there. It'll give you a warning. So that's that conditional updates, right? We want to give you the opportunity to choose to decide what's best for your cluster. At the same time, we don't want to allow candidate releases or something like that, which would be unsupported. So it's always going to be at least in the fast channel, if not the stable channel, depending on which one you've selected, because those are both generally available, fully supported releases. I also want to take a moment to point out, if we look in, where is it? This guy. So this is that 4.9.38 upgrade risks KCS, the one that I just linked in Twitch. So this first paragraph has some really interesting information inside of here. And I think it's really good to iterate this, which is, if we look at the set of releases that are available. So let's go to console.redhat.com/OpenShift. So if we come here and we go to releases, there's candidate releases, there's fast releases, and there's stable releases. And for the even numbered versions, there's also EUS. For now, EUS and stable are always going to match. Fast and stable will sometimes match, as will candidate on occasion, depending on how frequently the releases are done. But the key information here is that candidate is not a generally available release. It is not fully supported. So you can deploy a new cluster to that. You can update a cluster to that. But remember that both the update process to and the update process to a candidate version is not fully supported. And that candidate release may not ever get promoted into fast. It may never become a fully supported version. Right? So you can see here there was 2 releases, 34.9.39 and 40, that never made it into stable. So which you can find, or they may have never made it into fast either. So if you found yourself on a candidate release and there is an update process, or you can switch back to, say, stable channel later and update to one of these other releases, but that may not be a fully supported upgrade path. So this is, it gets a little confusing. And Johnny, help make sure that I'm explaining this correctly.
Yeah, you're all over it. This is good.
Yeah. So let's say that, today you have a cluster, you deploy a brand new cluster, and it's 4.9.41. It's in fast, which means that it's fully supported. You're good to go. Right? At some point in the future, so let's say in a month's time, you haven't changed anything. You're still on 4.9.41, but say 4.9.42 is in stable. You can change to the stable channel, you can update, and you'll be just fine, because both the source and the destination, that future 4.9.42, would be fully supported releases. Now, let's say that you either deploy a cluster or you upgrade an earlier cluster to 4.10.21. You'll notice that candidate, it's not in fast, it's not in stable at this point. So it is not a fully released, not a fully supported version. So 4.10.21 could, for lack of a better term, die on the vine right there, right? It never gets promoted, it never hits fast or anything like that. But you're on 4.10.21. So because it's candidate, there's no guarantee of a supported upgrade path. So maybe 4.10.22 comes out and it does make it to fast. You should be able to update, but again, it wasn't a fully supported release, so there's no guarantee that update from the unsupported 4.10.21 to the future, we'll assume fully supported 4.10.22 is there. So just be careful is kind of what I'm saying. The release cadence is, I think they try to release Z streams every week. And then whether or not they get promoted depends on a whole lot of different things and the timeline that they get promoted in and all of that. Like you can see, there was a very significant gap, at least 2 releases for 4.9. So yeah, go ahead.
So what would generally block, so say 4.10.21 is obviously in the candidate realm, and then say 4.10.22 comes out in fast or stable. Like what do you see being a blocker for that? Is it generally like a, like one of the core like cluster operators that maybe has an update that can't roll or whatever?
So it could be any number of things. I will say that I don't think that add-on operators affect those releases. So it would definitely be one of the core services. So something like a cluster version, any one of the cluster version operator managed operators. Oof. So if we look here, hit cancel there, we go to this cluster operators. Mm-hmm. So all of these operators are managed by CVO. Right. So cluster version operator. So if there's an issue with one of these, right, it's updated as a part of an OpenShift update. The only way to change these, to update these, is to update your OpenShift version. Whereas the other operators, all of the add-on operators, have their own life cycles. OpenShift logging and OpenShift virtualization and ODF and all of that other stuff, all separate. So they would not be a release blocker for the OpenShift release itself. But it could be anything in one of those. And you'll also note things like, so machine config encompasses CoreOS as well. So rel CoreOS updates are encompassed in machine config updates. So if there's an issue with something at the CoreOS level, I don't know, I'm sure any number of things.
Yeah.
That would also potentially block or result in a OpenShift update being pulled.
That's what I was thinking of. Like if something happened at like the CoreOS level, then you're probably just dead.
Yeah. All right. So again, I don't know if there's any questions. I don't have chat.
It's the next question that we got is just, it's an extenuation of previous question that we'll get to.
Okay.
Yeah, R208, I got you. We're queued up. I got you in just a second.
Okay. So yeah, we can pause there because I covered kind of the first three things, which is conditional updates are in the console now as of 4.10.16. 4.9.38 updates are blocked, which is the KCS that I linked inside of there. And 4.10.14 through 4.10.19 updates are kind of blocked. So here, I'll post this in here as well. So that way you can evaluate for yourself. So just be aware if you are wanting to update to any of those versions, take all of that into account. But there is, of course, if you determine that you are not affected by any of those, you have the option of doing that upgrade yourself, because they are all fully supported versions. And then we can take a pause there to answer any questions, because I've got a couple other things that we can talk about too.
Okay, so yeah, I'll tackle R208's question really quick. Well, actually, we can both do it. But the first question is, around exposing the OCP cluster to the internet. He's got a cluster that's in AWS. What's the best practice for doing that? And then the next question was that there's a demand to expose their apps on the cluster to the internet. What's the best practices for exposing it publicly and securely? So my approach to this is, like, if it's a production cluster or if these are production applications that you want to, like, when you're exposing them, you want to do an individual TLS certificate for each application. Like, you want to put, a bound, if your host name or if your application name is, johnny.apps.cluster.com, right? You want to have a certificate that's specific to johnny.apps.cluster.com, and then don't use a wildcard. That way, you have a bound certificate to your route, and then from there, everything else is just, let TLS do its thing. And then that's pretty much the goal. I think that's the golden rule, DNS, and then, a tree for it, and then a bound certificate to it.
Yeah, I'll add on a couple of things. So one, if we go to the docs, when we deploy, I think you said that you're deploying into AWS. So you have this installing a cluster. Oh, here we go. Installing a private cluster on AWS. So when you do this, basically what it does is it doesn't create the publicly accessible API and star.apps endpoint. Right? They're only accessible internal to whatever VPC you specify and that type of stuff. So generally speaking, I think most folks would say that's a good default best practice, right? We don't want to expose, especially the API externally, without good reason. I'm not saying that nobody does that or anything like that, or everybody does that. But I think most folks would say unnecessary exposure is additional risk that is, well, unnecessary. So if you do that, so I now have a non-externally accessible OpenShift cluster. Particularly in a hyperscaler, really all you need to do is create a new ingress controller using an externally accessible load balancer. So you would create, star.prod.cluster name or whatever, or star.public, for that new ingress controller, and use an externally facing load balancer from the hyperscaler. And that way you can control what's exposed. So remember, with the default start.apps, like, your console is going to be accessible. So here, if we come over here to my cluster, like this console-openshift.console.apps.blah, blah, blah, right? That's all publicly accessible. So any route that exists inside of my cluster, so if we come here to routes and we look at all projects, all of these things are available on the internet. If I create my cluster as private, all of these are now private. They're not available on the internet. And I can create that second ingress, and then I can choose, right? I can explicitly declare which routes use that publicly accessible ingress controller, and therefore which ones are exposed to the internet. So that would be my suggestion: is be deliberate about it instead of accidental, if you will, on exposing.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And the other thing, so the next question was, is there any magic required? And not really. It's actually pretty straightforward. I think when you're creating your routes, you can actually define the host name of the route, and you can actually add, especially on the TLS side. On the edge route, you can set the host name, and you can define the TLS certificate and key and all that stuff as part of the cert. And then John was asking what load balancer. If he's using the default, it's going to be the classic load balancer or the application load balancer inside AWS.
I think the classic load balancers are gosh, what's deprecated?
So, so it was like early. I could be going off old information here, but yeah, back in the day, like when we were doing this, like the manual disconnected, it was still classic, but this is still 4.7, so it's very possible.
Yep. So, and you, I don't remember, it's in the docs, but there's like, you would basically go and create a new ingress controller and you would provide all the information inside of here in order to do that. So just check the docs over here. I think maybe even in the next steps, it might have that inside of there. No, I guess not.
R28 said it's an app load balancer.
Yeah. Let's see. I thought there was another question over here.
There was one more.
OpenShift Admin episode on the descheduler. So yes, we did talk about that, and now I don't remember when or where. I don't think it was a main topic. I think it was one of the subtopics for that particular one. So if you have any questions, we can follow up and post into like the show notes. Oh, speaking of which, Johnny and I have been talking about and finally did the first step of creating a GitHub repo that we'll use for like show notes and code snippets and all of that other stuff to publish all of that. So keep an eye out on social media and all the normal places, and we'll of course talk about it here in the stream with a link over to that. So just a GitHub repo. Anybody can come in and contribute. We would love to have contributions, especially because we plan on publishing our calendar of future topics. So you'll be able to see how sometimes last minute we assemble these shows, and and of course you can make requests and make suggestions for things that you'd like for us to talk about or things that you'd like to see. But we'll be working on that over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully we'll be able to get that out there, because right now it's usually like things go out in GIFs or other places. So it's just another way to find the content that we've been talking about.
That's right. And the last question is, are there any options available to move a pod between OpenShift clusters?
I guess it depends on what you mean by move. Pods don't quote unquote live migrate like a virtual machine. So they get stopped and they get restarted. So if it's an ephemeral pod, right, there's no persistent data, then you would simply stop it on the source cluster and start it on the destination cluster, and it would pull the container image down and all that other stuff. If there is persistent data associated with it, as well as other configuration data, so let's say that it's been stood up by whatever means, the migration toolkit for containers is a super easy way of doing that. So basically you point it at both clusters. It's deployed as an operator. Am I still sharing my screen? I am.
Yep.
So if we come up here to operators and operator hub and we search for migration, so we've got this migration toolkit for containers. So you can deploy that inside of your cluster. It'll create a little application. You point it at the clusters, and then basically you say, I want to move this application. And that application consists of, a pod or a deployment and config maps and secrets and PVCs and all that other stuff. And basically it does all the work for you behind the scenes. So, if there's a PVC, you have the option of copying or moving it. So copy is useful if you have like OpenShift Data Foundation or something in your cluster. So the data is stored locally, and you have in your new cluster, you also have ODF, right? So it'll literally copy the data from one to the other. Move is handy if you have an external storage provider. So maybe you provision an NFS export and you introduce that PV into your cluster, and that's what the application is using. So move would just reintroduce that PV and reattach it without having to actually copy the data. So MTC or migration toolkit for containers is included with OpenShift. There's no cost for it or anything like that. It's a great tool.
I also posted the link to the episode that we did on it in the chat. So
thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll also point out that MTC is super handy for moving data within the same cluster. So, I have a gold, what is it? Gold, silver, bronze, cardboard, plastic, storage classes. My application requested gold, but really they need cardboard. So I'm going to, move, which is really copy the data over to that other one. And MTC can handle that for you as well.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool demo that they did. Like, just the amount of logic that they built into it, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And then just to confirm, I just checked the AWS console for my cluster out in US East 2, and I have a classic and 2 network load balancers. So it's probably going to be deprecated, but like as of today, 4.10 something, it's still using the classic.
Let's see. So I've got three topics left in our top of minds. So Johnny, you good with like another 10 or 15 minutes on that, and then we can do the demo?
Yeah.
Does that feel good? That seem about right to you? I don't know how much time you want.
Yeah, I don't. It shouldn't take too long.
Okay.
The longest part would be the pods restarting. But
okay, I said today was going to be a smorgasbord, so we're talking about all kinds of stuff.
Do it.
So I think something that a lot of folks don't know about is tab completion with the OC CLI. So if we go out here here we go, configuring the OpenShift CLI and the documentation here. And again, I'll post this link into chat here. So it basically walks through how to do the OC completion bash and then output that and add it into your bash completion. So this is really handy for a couple of different reasons. So hopefully this is readable. Let me know if it's not.
I can see it.
Okay. So this is really handy, not just for doing like OC, I can do get and or OC describe and it'll fill out that, but it also picks up on object names inside of the cluster. So let's do an OC get node. So I can do an OC describe node, and I can do IP and hit tab and it'll fill it out. So I can do 145 and hit tab, right? And it fills out the information for me. So it's useful for more than just, the options to the OC command, or OpenShift install has the same thing. Do -- help. At least I thought it did. Yeah, completion. So OpenShift install has the same thing with the completion and doing the bash shell completion. But it's super helpful for just avoiding mistakes. And the reason why I thought of this is because one of our PMs was having a conversation of, what should we name our operator? And they were concerned about using a long operator or a long namespace name, long operator name, because they thought it increased the risk of like misspelling or something like that. I'm like, well, yes, that's technically true. But you can make life easy for yourself, right? So if I do an OC get projects, I could spell. So we've got all of these inside of here, and you can see like some of these are super long, like OpenShift kube storage version migrator operator. But I don't have to remember all of that. Not only can I copy paste, see project OpenShift -kube -storage -version, right? And it just tab completion helps me out. So again, I feel like I don't know how many people know about that, but it is super useful and super helpful for me. If anybody's ever noticed, I use it pretty regularly.
Yes, it is quite awesome. And you can put it in your bash RC or your ZSH RC or whatever. And
Yep, that's what I do. Let's see, what was next on my list here? Let's have a conversation about supporting services for OpenShift. Johnny, this is one that you and I have had conversations about a few times. And so somebody was asking on one of the internal Slacks of, my customer has an API deployment, and when the cluster rebooted, it was, or no, what did they do? They did something. And basically the nodes were down for more than like 10 minutes. And when they came back, they had different IPs. And it was because their DHCP lease time was set to 10 minutes. So the question was, well, what does Red Hat recommend for DHCP and DNS and, load balancers and kind of all of these other core infrastructure services that are supporting, the OpenShift cluster? And my response to that was, well, we don't make recommendations, right? DHCP is, if you're using it in your data center, it's probably used for more than just OpenShift. You're probably using it for a lot of things. And there are good, valid reasons to have short DHCP lease times as well as long DHCP lease times, right? All the way up to infinite, right? And with infinite and bare metal IPI clusters, it will actually translate that into it will set a static IP address on the host. OpenShift will automatically. So my response was basically, we don't make a recommendation. It's entirely up to you and your services and how you manage those and all of that. But understand the ramifications of, so with DHCP, if you set a short lease time, it's useful if you have a lot of churn inside of your subnet, right? Maybe I've got, dozens, hundreds of hosts that are constantly popping in and out. And I don't want to, I don't want them to hold those leases. Rather, I would prefer they get released. So that way I can keep using them. I don't run out. I don't need to expand more, anything like that. The risk being, if a host is down for whatever reason, it's going to come back with a different IP. And for OpenShift, specifically control plane nodes, that's a bad thing. etcd can't reconnect, and then it just goes badly from there. And just FYI for anybody who doesn't know, so if you're doing OC git pod-in,
You're not sharing your screen anymore.
I reshare that. So we do OC git pod-in OpenShift etcd. So inside of here, we've got our 3 etcd pods. If I do an OC describe pod, an OC project OpenShift-etcd, OC describe pod, and we'll do this guy. If we scroll up in here, the reason why this is important is because the etcd operator, you'll see, configures based off of IPs. So it's declaring, here's your peers, here's how to find the other nodes inside of this cluster, and it uses the IP for that. So if this IP changes, then it can't find its peers. If it changes one at a time, it's fine. Basically, the operator will say, hey, your IP changed. I'm going to go through and I'm going to fix that. So it'll go through and it'll reconfigure each one of the nodes with the changed IP. But remember, if 2 of them change, then effectively etcd loses quorum and it goes read-only, and then it can't fix itself. If that happens on a production cluster, just open up a support case and support will walk you through the process of how to change that manually. So your applications would still be running, right? etcd is still there, it's just read-only. Eventually, I think, depending on the configuration, it may start shutting down workload. Basically, the nodes are going to say something's wrong, I don't know what's going on, and it'll start to terminate pods, but it is a recoverable scenario. So that's why, DHCP leases and changing IPs is bad for OpenShift, and especially the control plane. High availability for DHCP. If the DHCP server goes down and OpenShift is trying to scale out nodes using machine sets and it can't get an IP for those nodes, that means that something's not going to work the way you expected. DNS, same thing. If DNS isn't available, then lots of bad things are happening. It relies on DNS for accessing the API. Even internally, it uses DNS for API .cluster name .domain name and all that other stuff. So again, without those services, bad things happen to the cluster, and only you can answer what that availability threshold is for your applications, for your use case, for all those things. Some folks, it's fine. Hey, DNS, we only have one DNS server, but we've got a failover and it takes, a couple of minutes, and it's okay if things go haywire for a little bit. I would wager those folks aren't using Active Directory, because Active Directory, it is so heavily dependent on DNS.
Oh, yes.
So, and same thing for DHCP, right? Hey, it's DHCP in the data center, right? If we took your service seriously, we'd give it a static IP. That's just some folks' thought process. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can certainly deploy OpenShift, and you can use a mix of both static and DHCP. So deploy with UPI, stand up your control plane nodes, your infra nodes, all using static IPs, and then worker nodes are provisioned via machine sets and get, DHCP IPs. That's perfectly fine. Anyways, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing to add to that too is make sure that your scope sizes are, like efficient. You know what I mean? Like I get everybody wants like the most reasonable, like, DHCP scope or subnet or whatever, but it's like sometimes you can like like essentially overcommit to your process and do like a /29 or /30 and you really kind of restrict the amount of nodes that you can have. So just make sure that you set your scopes up correctly. That's the same thing on your machine networks and pod networks and all that stuff too. Like don't shoot yourself in the foot by trying to be cheap.
Yeah, I'll also add just kind of a general rule of thumb with any time you're doing capacity sizing is hopefully you're also monitoring these things. Like, hey, I've got a DHCP scope that's 200 IPs and 180 of them have been allocated. So when do I need to request a new subnet? When do I need to, change that? Well, it depends on how fast you're using those IPs. If you use one per day, then you've got effectively 20 days to figure out the new config before you run out of capacity. The same thing is true of storage, CPU, memory, right? Hey, I've got 1 terabyte of storage. It's at 800 gigabytes now, and I'm using 100 gigabytes an hour. Well, guess what? You've got 2 hours to figure out whatever your new storage solution is. So, set your alerts, so that you have time to take appropriate action. And I'm taken back to the event that triggered me to become a storage administrator, which was we had a rogue script that was writing terabytes of data out, and the junior storage administrator didn't know what to do. And it's like 10, 11 o'clock at night. So they were just adding hard drives to this. It was a NetApp to the NetApp. So they were just adding hard drives to the NetApp aggregate each time as it filled up. So we ended up with this like crazy, way super sub-optimized, right, or non-optimal configuration on the storage system because, I just didn't want it to fill up. And at one point it was, I don't know how much folks know about NetApp and the way that their stuff works, but it was like the RAID group filled up. So then it was, I tried to add one more disk, but it actually used 3 more disks because it had to create a new, basically RAID 6 RAID group inside of there.
Yes.
So suddenly we're in a situation where like all of this capacity that we thought we were going to use for other things was accidentally allocated. And once you do that, you can't take this back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, the joys of storage admin.
That's awesome.
Let's see. What else have I got here? I got one more thing. So Johnny, let's talk about overcommitment inside of OpenShift. So we've talked about this in bits and pieces before. I think I've talked about, it's been relatively recently. Like if we do an OC get node and I do an OC describe node, we want our IP-10. Come on. Fine. Don't work for me. I was just talking about how great you are, tab completion, and then you failed me. Oh, because I borked the command OC describe.
And you stop sharing your screen again.
Okay. And the right button over here to turn that back on. All right. So all I've done here is I did an OC describe. So I did an OC describe on our nodes. Once I figured out why tab completion wasn't working, which is I misspelled describe. If we look way down here in the bottom of this, basically we have this allocated resources and it tells us how much CPU, how much memory is tied up inside of requests, kind of irrespective of how much is actually being used by the node. So when we talk about overcommit with OpenShift, what we're talking about is allocating more resources into requests than what is physically available on the node. So if I scroll up here in our node, we can see that we've got here CPU. So it's a 2 CPU, 8 gigabyte of memory AMI inside of AWS. So 500, half a CPU is reserved for the system. The other 1.5 CPUs is available for whatever I want to do with it. Same thing with memory, right? It's basically saying, I think it reserves a gigabyte for the system, and then the other 7-ish gigabytes is reserved for, again, whatever we want to do with it. So if I wanted to, I can use, let me find my documentation tab here, the overcommit. So if we wanted to, we can configure overcommit on our nodes. Right. So basically we use the cluster resource override operator, and we can say, hey, you can allow up to 50% overcommit. So 50% in this instance would mean that, again, if we've got, say, 7 gigabytes available after the system takes its share, so 50% of 7 gigabytes is 3.5. So that would mean that I could create memory requests totaling 10.5 gigabytes inside of there. So that's great. That's fine. Everything will function normally until those pods actually need those resources, right? Remember, a request is tantamount to a reservation. They think that they have that resource. So if that happens, you'll essentially end up in like an out of memory kill type of situation for the pod. So it will be ungracefully like kill-9 terminated on that node. Some apps are okay with that, some aren't, right? All of those types of things. Be aware of how that affects your applications. In particular, this is important with things like if you're doing OpenShift virtualization. And most of the time we think of a hypervisor, you think of Rev or anything like that. It's, I can overcommit my memory. It's fine. I've, since I've been doing virtualization for 20 years, I've always, done a 2 or 4 or 6 or 8-to-1 overcommit on CPU and memory. Now, the reason why we don't want to do that with things like virtual machines is because Kubernetes doesn't have any mechanism for recouping memory. So with Rev, with KVM, we kind of have 3 different things that are available. So one is swap, right? So the host is out of memory, but the virtual machines want more memory, so we're going to start using swap space on the host in order to give them that access. 2 is ballooning, right? So there's a driver inside of the virtual machine that just starts eating memory, forcing the guest operating system to give it back. And then because it's controlled by the hypervisor knows that memory space is now available and it uses it for other things. And then the third one is in Linux, it's called KSM, or kernel same page mapping, I think is what it stands for. So effectively it's deduplication of memory pages. So if I've got 10 RHEL 8 VMs, more than likely, probably 50% of what they're storing in memory, all their various, KOs and everything else that's loaded, are the same. So it'll deduplicate that memory and it'll just point them all to one and free the rest of it. None of those 3 things work with OpenShift and Kubernetes. And not just with hypervisor, not just with OpenShift virtualization, but with any pod. So if we overcommit that, we basically have no way of protecting that workload. And when memory is out or CPU is out, it just starts terminating things. So we want to be very careful with doing overcommitment and understanding how that impacts. But that doesn't mean we can't oversubscribe. So oversubscribe would basically be having limits that are higher than the actual available resources on the node. So my VM here has 2 CPUs. There's nothing that says that I can't have limits, and it just so happens that none of these pods have limits. I bet a control plane node has some limits. Look at this guy. Yeah, so this guy has a number of different limits inside of here. Oh no, man, it doesn't really. That's surprising. Anyways, so I can have limits that are higher than that. And basically what happens is, let's say that, the pods, I'm trying to think of how to describe this. No one pod may be able to consume all of the resources, but collectively they can still exhaust resources on the node. So it's one of those, like, you're kind of hedging your bets as to one of these may have a lot of resource requests or a lot of resource usage, but I'm going to prevent it from, being a noisy neighbor. But all of them, maybe you've got 100 or 200 pods on the node, all of them won't need all of their resources at the same time. And if that happens, usually it's a controlled process, right? So by default, I think it'll do the limit is 80%, 85%, something like that. Basically, once it hits 85%, it'll start doing controlled evictions using eviction. I used the right word twice there. So we'll say, hey, I'm going to terminate this pod. I'm going to reschedule it. Instead of doing an out of memory kill, which is a hard, you will terminate now. Instead, it's graceful shutdown. Let me reschedule you onto a node that has other things. And that's kind of worst case scenario. Ideally, you'd have something like the descheduler, which somebody mentioned in chat a minute ago, configured so that way the descheduler can take action even before then to help balance resources in the cluster without one node running out of resources. All right. Anything to add there, Johnny? I've been rambling for a while. I just wanted to catch up on chat and see if you had anything to add.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. We did get some extra questions. So R28 asked, is it a good idea to pin a static IP to the OCP ingress route to access apps in our cluster that have host names aliases to the OCP cluster address? Oh, okay. To access the apps in their cluster. I read that as a continuing sentence. My bad. So to access the apps in their cluster, they have hostname aliases to the OCP cluster address. So they're using aliases that point back to their cluster address.
I would think so. I mean, that's sort of how the star.apps DNS works, right?
Yeah. You get a single IP, but if you just want to do like a single IP per route, you essentially have to. I was trying to think of that. Like, I think you'd have to set up like a service type load balancer and let that come up, and then that's what you'd end up doing.
Yeah, if you wanted to do an IP address per, you could either do is it ingress?
Yeah,
IP. Ingress IP. Yeah, so you can configure using external IP for the ingress. But I think Andrew's opinion, the easier way to do that would be on-prem using something like MetalLB, or if you're in a hyperscaler, using just a regular load balancer. Hopefully that answered the question.
Let's see here, and then I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. And then rhope 9, welcome back. But yeah, so we were just talking about like the DHCP thing, where if you're gonna have a DHCP scope, don't statically assign addresses within that scope that you're using to allocate dynamically the rest of your cluster. So have a scope. It's okay to have a DHCP scope that you're going to use to statically assign things, but then also have another scope that you're going to use for your dynamic.
Yeah, and I know like the ISC DHCP, which is the one that ships with RHEL and all of that, it won't let you do that. Right? You can't put a reservation inside of a DHCP range, and that can cause issues. A lot of folks will ask us, I provisioned my cluster with IPI, but you say that I need to have a DHCP reservation for the control plane nodes. How do I handle that? Well, you can either increase the DHCP lease so that it's going to be long enough that if those nodes are ever shut down, the IP doesn't change, or you can one at a time basically set a DHCP reservation, reboot the node. When it comes back, it'll have the new IP, allow the operator to reconfigure everything, and then rinse and repeat with the next node. So those are kind of the two options that I think most folks use.
Yep. And then D. Zilberman, oh man, I'm sorry if I butchered that. What are the best options to ensuring sticky session support for apps running on managed OpenShift, with or without HA proxy?
I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I'm not 100% on that either. I think just in my experience, if you want to manage sticky sessions, that should all be at the load balancer. Like, so if you have a F5 or if you're using Nginx or HA proxy, like let that do it. Because they all should have some type of configuration in there to make sure that session is at least somewhat sticky. But outside of just like that surface knowledge, that's about it.
Yeah, I'll have to ask that question internally. We'll follow up on that next week because that's one that I don't know. Never had to work with sticky sessions.
And then, so now we got some questions rolling in. What technology did Red Hat build the route in OpenShift?
So the ingress controller is HA proxy.
Mm-hmm.
So routes are kind of an abstraction that add some, I'll say, subjective value. So if we do routes versus ingress, OpenShift. So there's this blog post that we've got here. So it's a little bit older, but most of the information should still apply. So this is from 2018. And down here at the bottom, we've got this handy little checklist that kind of talks about different ways that things are done. So some folks don't like, or usually the biggest complaint I hear from folks, I should say, about routes is you can't store the certificate as a secret. So it gets added to the route object as metadata. So let's switch back over here. So OC get route. So if I look at, so for example, my console, I think that's the one we want. So let's see, project shift console. And then if I do OC get route, and I do OC show YAML, and then we'll look at this guy. Oh, it's not that super long name. OC get route dash O YAML console. There we go. No, this one doesn't have a custom certificate. It uses one of the default ones. But essentially, if you want to have a custom certificate for your route, you have to add it directly into the route definition instead of storing it as a secret. And then with an ingress, you say, here's your certificate over in this secret or in this config map, as the case may be.
Yeah, and we saw that when we were doing the cert demo too, the cert manager operator. Yeah.
Yeah, that's usually the biggest complaint that I hear from folks with routes. But other than that, you can see there's a number of kind of interesting additions. So with routes, we can do things like sharding and all of that. And I will admit, Andrew, for the last 4 years, I've been like 99.9% OpenShift. So I am not terribly familiar with the full capabilities of a default ingress in quote unquote vanilla Kubernetes or outside of Red Hat. So some of that functionality, maybe most of that functionality may be there. I'm just not super familiar with it.
Yeah, and with all the new controllers, I shouldn't say new controllers, but with the way that the controllers have advanced over time, I'm sure that this list is probably a little bit dated. But one thing to note too is that if you can create an ingress in OpenShift, and what will happen is the API will take that ingress, it'll apply it, and then it'll also spin up a route, and then that's how the connectivity out actually happens, or in rather. Yeah,
that's a good point. The routes are almost always brought up as one of the reasons why folks say that, OpenShift is proprietary, right? Mm-hmm. Even though every aspect, every bit of OpenShift is open source, it's, well, yes, but it's customized. And because it's customized, things like routes, I can't just pick it up and move it over to some other Kubernetes without, making some modifications. But reality is, just like you pointed out, you can create an ingress in OpenShift just like you do with any other Kubernetes, and it'll do the right thing, right? And it'll translate that into a route for you.
Let's see here. So then R28 had another question about scaling down nodes. Essentially, they made them too big and they want to scale them down. So what's the recommended approach for that?
If it's IPI, kind of two ways. So if you want to use the same machine set, essentially change the settings of the machine set and then scale it up to add new nodes with the new size, and then scale it down. And you'll want to, and I can never remember where this is at, manually scaling a machine set. So if you come in here to the machine set deletion policy, and I will post this into chat here. So what you want to do is basically have it either set to delete the oldest nodes first. So that way the first set of nodes that had the old size get deleted first. Or you can set a specific annotation on the machine that basically says, hey, delete this one. So both of those are encompassed here on this docs page that I linked. The alternative would be to create a new machine set and provision new nodes with the new machine set, and then delete the old machine set, and the nodes will go along with it. Kind of two sides of the same coin. Yeah.
I think that's it. Other than saying what's up to Khalid, welcome back.
Yeah. All right. So that was all I had. I know we spent like 45 minutes talking about those things. So I want to see. I haven't seen. I've seen the end result of this before, but I haven't seen it actually, like the setup of it done. So I'm excited to see the Keycloak, Red Hat SSO operator, and all that other stuff.
Yep. So we're going to do two different things, right? So like the first one is going to be Keycloak with just a standard, just using Keycloak as the OIDC integration for the IDP. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to integrate GitHub directly into OpenShift without Keycloak, because when I do the write-up and the gist, I'll actually have the Keycloak through, or the GitHub through Keycloak integration, but I've jacked up my URL, so I wasn't able to get it to test correctly, but I have the flow. I just got to get it right. So like when we put the gist up, we'll put put everything out in GitHub so that way you can see it. So,
Random question for you. Is this a part of any of the validated patterns?
SSO is not, or at least not yet.
No? Okay.
But I can definitely see it's going to be, right. There's one that we're working on right now with the team where they're starting to get integrated, and they have a big SSO component. So yeah, I can definitely see it happening. All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to do everything through the UI, hopefully. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and just install the Keycloak operator. I'm assuming, yeah, you can see my screen. So go to operators, operator hub. So the thing about this operator, the Keycloak operator or the Red Hat SSO operator, rather, is that it is tech preview. So just know that like there's, it's just tech preview support. So like there's, best effort.
And Johnny, you might need to increase the size there a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. Better?
Yeah, it was I was just checking on the stream and I had to go full stream to be able to read it. So I think that's
okay.
Better.
Okay, cool. So the first thing we need to do is I just created a project and I called it SSO. You can pretty much create whatever you want. And then just normal stuff with installing the operator. And then once this installs, we'll see it. We'll see that the CRD is available. So with the Keycloak operator, with the RHSSO operator, we can install Keycloak. We can create realms. We can create users. We can create all the clients and stuff like that through the operator if we wanted to. But what I'm going to do, I think it's just a little bit cleaner, is if we do it through the actual Keycloak interface once it gets going. So once this actually installs, all right, boom. I made a critical tactical error today, Andrew. I didn't eat before I got on the stream, and now I'm hungry.
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear my stomach growling, but
that's why I'm holding my microphone away from me so that way you can't hear it, because it's starting to get obnoxious. All right, so we're going to create an instance of Keycloak, and then I'll just call it example Keycloak. And so there's so many options in here that like there's for production deployment, there's a lot of things that you could do. Like you could have an external database, and something to keep in mind is that the production deployment of the operator, when you get there, does not support the integrated database. You want to have an external Postgres or whatever. So just keep that in mind. Our storage class name is going to be GP2, and that is pretty much it for the, just to get the Keycloak CRD or the Keycloak instantiated. But as you can see, there's a number of things that you can do. Like you can add to the Postgres spec. You can set this setting here is going to be deprecated. So you don't need to worry about that, but you can increase the number of instances. There's all kinds of things that you can actually configure on this Keycloak. But because we're doing a demo and we don't care, we're just going to do.
So I guess a point of clarification for me. So if we look in the OpenShift docs, there's a whole bunch of authentication providers, right?
Yep.
So there's Active Directory, there's HD Password, all of those other things.
Yep.
And the Red Hat SSO or Keycloak one is important because it integrates with other services. So you can do that SSO through GitHub and stuff like that. I think I also remember that through those integrations, it's also the only way to do two-factor authentication.
Yeah. So with Keycloak, definitely, because you can set up your OTP and you can set up your OTP algorithm and all that stuff. So that would actually be a cool demo to do. It's just getting all that stuff set up to where we actually use like our OTP client to generate a key and then log in using the token and everything. I think that'd be a pretty good one. But yeah, definitely with Keycloak, 100%. So if you look at the authentication method, you have like OpenShift and then IDP, the identification provider or identity provider. Then you can go directly to GitHub and GitLab and all that stuff, right? Outside of Keycloak. And then the other way is, like you said, use Keycloak as like that broker between like the OpenShift and that backend service. And you can actually use Keycloak directly. You know, you could have all your users sitting on the Keycloak itself, which is what we're going to do today. But yeah, essentially the Linux, right? You can skin a cat like 10 different ways.
Yeah. No offense to any cat lovers.
Yeah. Sorry. But yeah, here's some of the backend providers that are supported. So you have GitLab, Google, Keycloak, Okta, Ping, all this stuff. And then if you have like a backend identity source like an IDM or Active Directory, you could also use that through LDAP. All right, so let's go back over here. All right, so cool. So this is what we're waiting on. We're waiting on this phase to go to reconciling. So now what we can do is we can go to our workloads, go down to secrets, and what we're going to grab is our credential here. And this is going to be the admin user password. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to go down to networking, and then routes. And I'm just going to open up this route. Boom. All right, so admin.
I also think it's important to point out that the Red Hat SSO, the entitlement is included with OpenShift as well.
Right.
So you don't have to pay extra for it.
Yep. And so then, let me not get too far ahead of here. So we have our master realm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a realm, and I'm just going to call it AOA for asking OpenShift admin, because that's what we do. And then now that we have it, I'm going to come over to clients, and I'm going to create a client, and I'm just going to call it Keycloak. All right. And then I'm going to scroll down, give it a name of Keycloak. And then I'm going to set the access type to confidential. I'm actually going to do it. All right, boom. And then this redirect URL, this is going to be the OAuth server. So this, I'm just going to come over to my terminal. You can't see this, but route -n OpenShift Authentication. Okay, cool. So then, and then what we're going to do is we're going to send it to the OAuth 2 callback, and then we're going to call this Keycloak. And so the way that this is working, I'm not going to lie to you and act like I know exactly what this OAuth 2 callback is, but it's essentially just doing a callback to the provider. It's telling it to, hey, use this callback method to go get this identity or this provider. So Keycloak. All right, so now we just click save. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a credential. Or actually, I'm sorry, because I've made it confidential, it's going to create the secret. So then the next thing that we're going to do is create a user, and I'm just going to call it, okay, I'll just call it JRock. Okay, no, I'm going to confuse myself. I'm going to J Rickard. I'm going to make it bad. Let me not do this. All right, and then I'm going to set a password.
Didn't you do that last time with the certificate provider?
I did. I tried to get clever, and then I ended up I just messed myself up. So I'm not going to do this. All right, but cool. So I set my password, and so with this temporary, what that's saying is like, hey, go ahead and use this password to log in. But as soon as you log in, you're going to have to reset it.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to go back up to my client, and just to recopy that secret again. Copy, and then I'm going to go back over to OpenShift. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to go to Administration, Cluster Settings, Configuration, and then I'm going to search for OAuth. And then in here, I'm going to add an identity provider. And so you can see just from OpenShift, we have all of these different providers that we can connect to. So we could do LDAP, Keystone, HT password, all the gets, Google, all that stuff. So we're going to do OpenID Connect.
And I don't know when they added all those into the GUI. I discovered it a couple of versions ago, but it's super handy.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, it's really awesome. All right, and then this URL is going to be the route to the
Keycloak.
To the Keycloak. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, all I'm doing is in a terminal, I'm just getting the route.
Yeah, it's just OC get route.
Yep. Bam, and then it's going to be auth, and then realms, and then AOA.
Because that's the realm you created a minute ago.
Yep, exactly. And because I'm dumb, I forgot to get the secret for the CA. So I'm going to go back over to workloads really quick in a new tab. Workloads up here. All right, and so now all projects. And I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to save it into a file in my temp directory. So just
Right.
I'll have all these directions.
So this is the CA that's used for the self-signed router certificate, right?
Exactly.
So if you go to anything start.apps, this is the cert that's there.
That's exactly right.
And I'm assuming this would be whatever, if you're using, what did we use last time? Acme, the Acme provider, right? It should probably be integrated, maybe. I don't know.
It could be, yeah. Especially if we have it on if we have a wildcard route, then 100%, yeah, it would be definitely be integrated.
So you just grab the router CA one because that's the one that was created and signed when the cluster was deployed. But you would use whatever your CA is for whatever certificate you're using for the route.
Yep, absolutely.
And the reason I think the reason why that might be confusing is because it's circular, right? We're hosting the identity provider and then pointing the identity configuration or the OpenShift identity back at itself, which is where that comes from.
Exactly. All right, and so what's going to happen now is this takes a little bit because what happens is the authentication operator, we're waiting for it to do its loop, right, and do its reconciliation. And then what's going to happen is it's going to make its way around, and then it's going to realize that, oh, I've got to change. And so it's going to start applying this config to the pods. So it just takes a second for it to kick off.
Yeah, I think it kicks the API server pods too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say something and completely forgot what it was. So.
All right, cool. Well, so what I'll do is I'll leave this alone for now, and then I'll start adding the stuff for GitHub.
Oh, I remember what it was. So one of the things I wanted to point out is the Keycloak or the Red Hat SSO that's included with OpenShift, you can use for authentication from anything. So if you're using if you have like a OpenShift hub cluster where you've got, OpenShift and ACM and ACS and authentication and all that other stuff, you can have like that one cluster have all of those things in it, and it's all considered infra workload. So in that instance, if it's a true, hub cluster with all of those things for managing other clusters, you wouldn't have to entitle any of those nodes. So I thought that was really cool. And despite the fact that I'm one of the maintainers for the subscription guide, I never noticed that until I was looking earlier that it's actually it says that in there that you can use it for both internal and external.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. All right, so all I'm doing here is I'm just essentially doing what I did in Keycloak, but I'm doing it in GitHub. So in GitHub, you go to your account and then settings and then developer settings, and then you create an OAuth application. And so essentially what we're going to do is we're going to point to our OAuth server. So it's just telling GitHub to redirect back to OAuth. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put that OAuth 2 callback, and then we're going to just call this GitHub just to keep it simple. All right, and then I'm going to register the application. And so what this is going to do, it's going to give me a client ID. And we're going to take that, we're going to use that in our OpenShift IDP. But now I can also create a secret. And so then I'll just first copy this client ID. There's some back and forth there, which gets kind of it's a little quirky, but so that's OAuth. Paste this here, and then the client secret is going to be this. Oh, I've got too many links open. And so the host name, if you're using a GitHub Enterprise, that's when this is necessary. If you're using GitHub Enterprise, you also need the CA file from the GitHub Enterprise server. We don't need actually, I'm going to put my organization, which is hybrid cloud. Oh, please spell this right. Patterns. All right, and then that should be it. So I'm going to click add. All right, cool. So now you can see that I've got 2 identity providers that I can go to. And let me see if this operator is doing its thing. Okay, so the operators, it's applying right now. But if we look at the YAML for it, so before I move on, the cool part, if you think about this, I've done all of this through the UI, minus some like checking, right? Just some like grabbing resources just from the CLI, like routes and stuff like that. But everything has just been done through the GUI, which is pretty awesome.
But you can, at the end of the day, it's all YAML.
Exactly.
And the reason why I bring that up is because you can also do that with ACM. So with ACM and the governance policies, you can have it automatically push out the authentication authorization configuration like the moment the cluster is provisioned. Again, I've been working with a bunch of like multi-cluster stuff lately, so I've been learning a lot more about how all that stuff works.
Yeah, it's crazy awesome. Like I'm super happy with a lot of it. Like there's some things where like all the things that you have to interact with it, like the imperative action, that it would be nice if that was a little bit cleaner, especially for like automation. But no, that's nothing on the ACM side. I'm just talking about like just some of the Red Hat operators in general. All right, so it looks like the reconciliation has gone through. So I'm going to log out. And by the way, just so you know, like the way I'm checking that is I'm doing an OC get CO, so OC get cluster operators, and then I'm able to see the status. All right, so now we can see I've got my kube admin if I wanted to log in. So the good thing about this is you want to make sure that you have, actually, I don't know, maybe you know, Andrew, has the recommendation changed, but where obviously set up your OAuth provider, make sure you have a user that has cluster admin, and then pull out the kube admin, or are we still saying keep kube admin or kill it still?
I don't know that we make a hard recommendation, but I think most of the security, what are they, like the security policies, like what am I trying to think of here? What's the operator that does applies the recommendations? Anyways, most of them are going to say to delete the default admin user and create custom ones. So you can still do certificate-based authentication with users other than cluster admin. So when you provision a new cluster, right, when you do the OpenShift install, it'll go through and it'll generate the kube config, and that kube config will have the certificate used for cluster admin authentication. And that one never expires. But you can go in and there's a KCS. I'll dig it up in just a moment. And I think Johnny froze and died. So I'm just going to talk to myself for a moment. Or frozen and drop. He's probably furiously restarting his browser and or laptop. But yeah, so you can add like, an Andrew specific admin user that uses certificate-based authentication so that if the authentication provider is ever down for whatever reason, you can still connect with that certificate. Because that's the danger. If you're if you have, say, if you remove that kube admin auth provider or something like that, if you're configured for, say, GitHub authentication and knock on wood, GitHub goes down, right? Oh no, I can't authenticate, but I need to do something. How do I get it back up and running? If that's the only authentication provider you have configured, you can still use certificate-based authentication and be able to access that. So let's see. While we're waiting on Johnny to come back, I'm going to reshare my screen and let's see if we can find that certificate-based authentication. ACS. OpenShift container platform. I know it's a KCS. And yeah, here. How to set up a certificate-based authentication for an OpenShift user. Although that one is OpenShift 3 and unverified. Here we go. Verified and for OpenShift 4.6. So this one will walk you through the whole process of generating that certificate, generating the kube config, and then you can authenticate that way. I'll post this into the chat here. Hey, welcome back.
Well, that was fun.
It's okay. I filled in the airspace with doing certificate-based authentication. So
okay, awesome. Yeah, that was weird. Okay, my bad.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, so if we go back, so now this is what I did is I went back. I've got my URI wrong in my Keycloak, so I'm going to fix that in a second. But just to keep going with the GitHub integration, right? So I logged in, I clicked GitHub, and it took me to this page. And so what it's saying is, I need to authorize the organization that I'm in to access to my IDP.
You might need to share your screen again.
Oh. Yeah. Boom. All right. Cool. And then.
Yep.
All right. Cool. Is that good?
Yep.
All right. Awesome. So now what I'm saying is, I just need to. So I clicked on GitHub, and it brought me to this page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grant my organization access to this. All right. So now I'm going to authorize this dude because he's pretty awesome. And what's going to happen is it's going to take me to the OpenShift console as like a normal user. So then at this point, what I could do is I could say, as a kube admin or a cluster admin rather, I could go in and give this user permissions. So if I want to make this user the admin over a project, or if I want to make them a cluster admin, I could actually do this. So what I'm going to do instead though is log out, and then I'm going to open up another terminal so I can get my kube admin password because it's most terrible.
Yeah, Mike Murphy, I would agree. I think LDAP is probably the most common, because if you're using the Red Hat Identity Manager, or if you're using Active Directory, both of those are going to be LDAP based. But SSO is useful, especially, like I said before, two-factor authentication, as well as I think it can. It's SSO, right? So it aggregates multiple authentication methods, authorization methods as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that you can use the different realms, you can have different realms for different applications and stuff like that. It's a pretty diverse tool. I think it's pretty awesome. All right, so just to log back in, I got to figure out what I did with my Keycloak URI. So if I go to settings, clients, so I've got to set as Keycloak there. I bet I have it misnamed over here. OAuth. Every time. I'm going to mess it up 100% of the time. I'm going to mess it up every time. All right, now let's try this again. All right, so that should be okay. And so the reason why the auth doesn't have to redo it is because this is the backend now at this point, right? So the identity provider has already been added into OpenShift. We can make changes on the SSO side without affecting. Oh man, I did make a Rickard, but yeah, okay. All right, and so this is what I was saying before, where I put in my default password. So I set this user up with a generic password. They've gone in using that password. Now they can reset it. Mm-hmm. And so now same thing, right? So same thing with GitHub. So I've been able to log into this cluster with my identity to, using GitHub as a backend authentication, and now using Keycloak as a backend OIDC authenticator. And like I said, in our write-up of this, I'll have the actual full, spectrum config where it's got like SSO and GitHub and then OpenShift. So that way you can kind of see, I've got one backend with Keycloak as the integrator or the intermediary, and then OpenShift as the obviously the backend server.
And if I remember correctly, SSO will also allow you to basically associate multiple accounts with the same user. So your Rickard here in the SSO, but you could also associate, Rickards with or some other username. I don't know. With your GitHub account, if it's, Johnny at GitHub, or it's Rickard J with Google, right? All of those things can come together into basically one account. So that way you, the user, can use whatever method you want, and it's abstracted away.
Yep, exactly. And it's a single identity to OpenShift.
Yeah. Dorbian, is it possible during an IPI bare metal installation to supply a password for the core user by modifying manifests? Technically, yes. You could go in, you could do that at install time. You could also do it day 2. My question would be why? Certificate-based authentication is there out of the box. So that would be the recommended method, I think, from most purposes. But yeah, you can technically set a password. The other side of that, and I'll only soapbox on it briefly, is in theory, there's not a lot of reasons to log into a CoreOS host. It should be treated as an appliance. If you do need to access it, I generally try to recommend to folks to debug. So you can do an OC debug node/node name, and it'll drop you into that node, and you can, do most things that you need to do there. But yeah, I think most folks discourage connecting directly to the hosts unless, if you can.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm not sure if he's talking about the core user or if he's talking about the kube admin, because core, as long as the SSH is up, you can SSH in if you have it set up with the username and key.
Yeah,
yeah,
and it is core. They say core. Not sure I see the benefit of replacing a public private key with a password. Yeah, +1 or Hope9. For when API is not available and local access would be needed. So you can still use SSH or key-based authentication in that case, but even then, if it's not, so if the API isn't up, even connecting to the host, right, the most that you're going to be able to do and help in that case is, you're connecting to try and do like a Cree control or Cree cuddle restart pods or something like that. At that point, there's a lot of things going wrong. Lior, wants to know OpenShift has an option to set reactive auto scaler, proactive scaling. Okay, I'm wondering if there is a proactive scaling, schedule to scale at a specific date time. I don't think so, at least not directly. You would want to do something like create a cron job inside the cluster in order to trigger that type of action. Kita is on the roadmap. I think they're hoping to do a tech preview release of that with 4.10 in the next few weeks. But Kita will allow you to effectively auto scale based off of kind of a lot of different metrics. Johnny, I'm going to hijack the screen share.
Oh yeah, I'll stop. My bad.
So if we search for Kita Kubernetes, so if we go to this kita.sh and scroll down, you can see that there's just all kinds of things that you can plug into in order to figure out when you want to scale, including there's a cron one based here, although it is a community one. So I don't know which ones will be supported by Red Hat out of the box. Usually the one that we highlight is Prometheus, right? So you can basically point it at Prometheus and say, based off of this particular metric inside of the Prometheus data store, trigger a scale operation. But yeah, off the top of my head, the way that people have historically solved it is cron job. The way that it will be solved in the future is either cron job, or I think Kita is a really good option. But again, keep an eye out for that tech preview coming in the next few weeks. And Johnny, I think we've already discussed. We did have who was it? Gaurav came on. Somebody already came on and talked about that. So we'll dig up the link for that too. We had situations where the machine was not reachable, only through an ILO interface. Troubleshooting was needed to resolve this. Yeah, I get it. Dorbian. It's easy for us to kind of take the high horse of, oh, you should never do that. SSH bad, SSH with password worse type of thing. But you do what you got to do. So yeah, I get it. But yeah, definitely. So when you create the manifests, just like you would do day 2 with a machine config, you would do essentially the same thing. So OpenShift install, create manifests. You would go into that directory. You can see the layout of it. It's fairly intuitive. You can add it inside of there and it'll get included in. All right. Well, it's 12:30 my time. So we've been at it for an hour and a half. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to ask those here in the chat. Happy to do our best to answer your questions here in the last couple of minutes before we drop for this week. If there's anything that we didn't address, if you don't feel like we answer your question adequately, if you're not watching us live and something comes to mind, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer those questions. Johnny and I love getting email, social media. Again, I'm not the best always at responding to those things in a timely way, especially so email. Usually it's within a day or two. Twitter, I'm not a social media person, and I think my Twitter email, like the push notifications, are turned off. So usually it's only once or twice a week that I'll check Twitter. So I'm not ignoring you. I'm not avoiding you. I promise. It's just I haven't looked at Twitter. Again, Slack, the Kubernetes Slack, the OpenShift users channel on the Kubernetes Slack is probably the best way to get a hold of both myself and Johnny. So you can reach me at Practical Andrew on kind of all of those various social media platforms and all those things. You can also reach out via email, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. I'm, again, very happy to answer any of those questions that you happen to have. You can also reach out to Johnny. We try and include each other on responses. So if you only hit one of us, whichever one you do send a message to, we'll include the other one. But yeah, feel free to reach out to Johnny as well, jrocktx1 or johnny@redhat.com. Let's see. I don't have anything else. Our Hope 9. Yeah, Our Hope 9. You've been asking since like a long time for us to extend the format. We're slowly inching it out there, right? Most days we're in the hour and 15 to hour and 20 range. Seems like we've been doing a little more 90-minute ones now, but I think I officially extended my calendar block out to an hour and a half as well. So that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I just started blocking out Wednesdays so that way I could cheat and have,
all I'm hearing is Johnny wants to go all day.
Hey, it's interesting. So yeah, sometimes.
It's funny. I think when you first started, we were talking about doing like a install mega marathon or something of let's spend like 8 or 10 hours and just go through like all of the install methods. And I think it kind of, we'll say petered out just because that just sounds exhausting. But I've toyed with the idea. I thought about, having some much longer streams that we can use to cover a bunch of different in-depth topics. But we'll see.
It'd be kind of cool to go through like all the what's new stuff. Like, hey, what's new? And it's just like, the top 15 things and just go.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I think they scheduled the next what's new, but I don't remember the date that they scheduled it for. So anyways, just a couple of closing things. If again, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those and we'll address those in just a moment. Next week, I will not be here. It'll be Johnny and Mr. Reese Oxenham. So I'll be at a training class, but you're in good hands. Johnny's got it down.
It's going to be amazing.
And Stephanie will be back. So, I don't have to multitask, or you don't have to multitask, I guess. I think Reese will be talking about some like data center to edge strategy type things. We'll have to catch up with him. He's at an event today, actually.
Oh, OpenShift Commons. Yeah, OpenShift Commons London.
Yeah. So, Reese is based in the UK. So he was at the one in Dublin a week or two ago, and now he's at London today. So if anybody happens to see him over there, say hi. 2 weeks. I should have collected all of our things here. I don't remember what we've got going on. We've got stuff going out. Anyways, this is my long-winded way of saying, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you are interested in any of the stuff that we've got coming up in the future. We do try and keep all of our stuff up to date. So whether it's on the various calendars, whether it's in the streaming list and all that other stuff, if you subscribe, you'll get notifications for all those things. And Stephanie is with us in spirit, and she would be harassing me on the back end chat now to say, don't forget to like on whatever platform you're on. Exactly. You're watching us on as well. Let's see. Any questions that came in?
There was one that came in about creating the Grafana dashboard. Oh, I'm sorry. If you got it, go ahead.
No, you're good.
How do you? Awkward.
Yeah, we just stare at each other. How do you build a Grafana dashboard for monitoring the health of your clusters? So we did a stream on creating custom Grafana dashboards not too long ago. I will, let's see.
Looking it up right now.
Okay, thank you. So Johnny will dig up the link for that. It's pretty straightforward. Basically use the Grafana community operator, deploy an instance of Grafana inside of there. And then you would point it at the Thanos instance or the Prometheus instance inside of your cluster. And you can build dashboards from there. Including using community dashboards. So I think in the stream, the example I used was the node dashboard from the community to print out kind of all the node information inside of there. But it's a straightforward process. There's a couple of blog posts that are linked from inside of there as well, including the one that has the magic of generating the service account token that you use for authentication inside of there. But it's all detailed. Let's see, some great dashboards. Yeah, part of ACM's observatory. That's a good point. Hope 9 and Jimmy Alvarez, who was here last week, would be quick to point out that ACM also aggregates and showcases a bunch of health metrics regarding clusters, etc. So definitely don't. If you have ACM, if you're using ACM, check out all the metrics that it uses as well, because it's a different set of metrics. There is some overlap, but they tend to focus more on the high level. Is it healthy, rather than the low level? Like, here's all of these little metrics, and here's why it's healthy or unhealthy, as the case may be. All right, that's all I got. I don't see any other questions. Again, feel free to reach out to us on or off the air if you have any other questions. Thank you, Johnny. Appreciate you. What do you think regarding satellites? IBM Cloud Satellite or Red Hat Satellite?
I'm assuming Red Hat Satellite.
I have no. I Satellite has been really useful and really helpful for a long time for a lot of RHEL administrators and doing the things that it does. I think if we're talking strictly OpenShift, I don't know how helpful it is for OpenShift. And that's an honest question. I have never used the two of them together. So I've never used a Satellite to try and provision clusters or manage clusters or entitle clusters or anything like that. So I don't know if you have any thoughts, Johnny.
Yeah, so mainly on like the disconnected side, OpenShift 3 days, we would use it to host all the content and then pull it over. From the registry side, though, we'd always use just a external Docker registry. Like it just wasn't easy back in the day. The other way I've seen it used is using it as an external service within the cluster. So you'd actually have satellites sitting out there. You create an external service pointing to that satellite. So that way, like some of your managed builds, or I can't remember what they're called. The subscribe builds or whatever. I can't. There's a certain phrase. I just entitled builds. Thank you. You could do it that way, right? So especially in a disconnected environment, you can point to your satellite as an external service and then build.
Limited experience with weird cluster performance due to vSphere has been helped by ACM dashboard. Yeah. Because they're disconnected, it can be helpful. There's also a KCS. Let me see if I can find that. There is a whole KCS on like troubleshooting issues with OpenShift on vSphere. Let's see here. Is this the one that I want? Nope. Anyways, I'll dig that up. I'll post it into the chat. So yeah, ACM, because it's a separate instance and it's effectively Thanos forwards all of those metrics up to the ACM instance, so they're decoupled. They can be useful when you have a cluster that's being wonky and just won't respond. Deepak, is there a way to have an HA Prometheus? So yes, you would set up a forwarder for Prometheus. And I don't remember off the top of my head how to do that, but it's in the documentation. I don't know if you have that link.
I have no idea.
Okay. So there was a forwarder, logs. No. Anyways, there is essentially use a Prometheus forwarder. And I don't remember where it is off the top of my head. I've looked this up before. So I'll dig that up. We'll talk about it next week. We'll bring it up and have those links, and we'll additionally put them into our shiny new GitHub repo once we get all of that stuff staged and ready. So keep an eye out there, and we'll publish that link on social media and all the other places. So keep an eye out. All of that's coming soon. Okay, I'm all done. Thank you, Johnny, as always.
Awesome.
For being my wingman. Good luck next week. I'll still be. It's online training, so I'll still be sort of accessible. I'll have the window up. I'll be watching.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna make Reese do everything, so I'm just gonna let him go.
Yeah. All right. Again, for anybody who is not watching us live, feel free to reach out, andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. And you can also, of course, find us on the Red Hat live streaming landing page, red.ht/livestream. Have a great week, everybody. Johnny, I will leave you with the last words.
Yeah, thanks, man. This has been, it was awesome figuring out all the identity stuff. So it's given me some ideas for some extra demos. So yeah, it's awesome. and have fun in your training next week.
Yeah. Well, I'll do my best. All right. Bye now.
Later.